which is kind of like a powdery substance, and dissolve it into water, the density is going to go up. As we discharge the battery, the sulfuric acid, and I think I showed this in a couple of different slides, and the lead peroxide and the lead all change state. So the amount of sulfuric acid in the water will decline. Once you get almost completely, totally flat discharge done, I think one of the groups had a cell, at least one cell that was that way. Then you'll have almost no sulfuric acid in the water, so you have pretty close to pure water. So the specific gravity will get quite a bit less dense. In fact, water, okay, we said like 1,200, 1,100. Water's up here somewhere.
Would be 1,000, right?
Yeah, water's 1,000 or 1.000. Technically, scientifically, there should be a decimal point on each of these. We never bothered those. For our purposes, we're going to record some data and try and make a nice little chart. In the real world, all you care about is, am I down here somewhere? Is the ship floating high? If it isn't, the first thing I got to do is recharge the battery. I can't do anything else. Got to get the power source back up to snuff. Once I've got the power source back up to snuff, then I can start the engine, do other things, and start doing other diagnosis. That's why oftentimes these guys, they'll just have a red, a white. Some of them are so simple, they don't even do that. They just have a series of little balls. If all the balls are floating, it's charged. If half the balls are floating, you need to recharge it, half or less. So some of them are pretty rudimentary and simple. Okay, with the lead acid battery, and by the way, the numbers I'm going to give you here, a few of the numbers I'm going to give you, like voltages, they'll be, in this case, specific to lead acid batteries. When we get into some of the other technologies, you'll find those batteries operate at different voltages because we're talking about different metal electrolyte combinations. So for example, the lead acid absorbent gas mat, or AGMs, they tend to like to be about half a volt to a volt higher. Lithium polymer batteries like to be, they're actually quite a bit. Instead of being 2.13 per cell, they're more like about 3.10 per cell. And it's for this, they also have very different internal resistances. This is why we never mix battery chargers with different types of batteries. You can make for a real mess. All right, so with the lead acid battery, this is an example. On AGM, they love 14.2, but a standard vented cell lead acid battery, if you get much above 14.2, you're going to start charging at a rate that will cause the electrolyte to start gassing off at a pretty good clip. The oxygen and hydrogen will start breaking apart, and it'll start gassing off. The acid stays in there. All you're going to be doing is causing water to disappear.
It heats up a little.
Okay. It'll also get warm, and that'll also cause some evaporation as well. Was that your question?
No, is it because of the different densities is why the water wants to split and leave first, and then the sulfuric acid stays?
The sulfuric acid doesn't evaporate. It's
right. Okay.
Just like tables don't
because
evaporate.
Of the density?
The heat probably makes
The
it.
sulfuric acid isn't a liquid until you dissolve it into something.
Okay.
Okay. And that's true. If I take a soda and I pour it out on the table and come back the next day, all the water will be gone and I'll have a sticky mess here.
Okay.
The sugar didn't evaporate. Okay, it's a pretty nasty sticky mess, covered with ants and stuff, and cockroaches and other icky stuff. Okay, same thing would be true here. Only the acid would also have eaten a hole on the table. So batteries that are overcharged or charged at too high a rate. Well, now wait a minute. How do I get it to charge above 14.2 volts? Don't I just start turning the battery charger up?
More amperage.
Okay, more amperage, higher voltage. Okay, so some of you guys, I told a couple of you guys to bring it up a little bit. Well, as you brought the current up, you probably also saw the voltage rise some.
Yes. Yes.
That's what the battery charger or the power supply does. It'll bring the voltage up to bring the current up. So in truth, you're gonna be doing some current limiting there. Now, that said, it's really not directly a function of the voltage, it's a function of current. So I could also have a voltage limiting device like a voltage regulator and still hit the battery with 60 amps, which is exactly what your engine does. Okay, if you got a pretty well dead battery or pretty low battery, not completely dead, but pretty low battery, get the engine pop started or jump started, and then your Jenny starts genning, it's hitting it with pretty high amperage. Okay, it's not the best thing in the world for the battery, right? Not the best thing in the world for the battery at all. Which is why, if you've got a dead battery and you're not in a hurry, the bad guys aren't chasing you. I highly recommend pull the battery out of the vehicle, clean everything up, service it correctly, charge it overnight, that kind of a thing. Okay. So, any gases that come off are not from the acid, it's from the water. And it's due to either direct splitting of the water or evaporation. It's usually a combination of both. That means when you put new fluid back in there, it should only be pure water. Okay, distilled or pure water. They're both there. Distilled means it's purified.
No tap water. We got stuff in it.
No, see, the good thing about living in San Diego, you don't need to take vitamins and minerals because it already comes in the water.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
Plus the chlorine and all that stuff.
It's super
Yeah,
hard.
you don't need all that stuff.
It's super hard water.
It comes in the water. Okay. So again, if you charge it at a really high rate, what will happen is you start superheating the battery, and as those plates heat up, they start to flex. They can damage the barrier, the insulated barriers between them. They can cause the plates to flex enough to start cracking. Remember the plate as I showed you? It's got sort of a rigid grid work, and then in the middle between, they've just taken a bunch of threads of lead or lead peroxide and mashed them into a centered sort of porous material and sort of stuck it in there, right? It's not held in there all that strong. So if you start heating things up to a fairly high temperature, you can start causing the battery to break down. You can also get it so hot that it swells up and cracks the case. What will happen also is, as the battery starts discharging, its lead is turning into lead sulfate. Okay, both plates, lead sulfate. You want that lead sulfate to form into small microgranules that will easily dissolve back into lead and sulfuric acid in an electrolyte. Okay, this isn't a very conductive substance. It needs to be somewhat conductive for the electricity to cause it to recharge. But if you end up with big, huge nodules like this, they don't conduct well at all. And what happens is, as this thing goes to recharge, particularly if it gets hot, the smaller nodules around there tend to dissolve and form back into sulfuric acid and lead peroxide. But the big nodules tend to just break off. And once they disconnect from the plate, they're no longer electrically in the circuit. So they migrate their way down to the bottom of the cell and just sit down there, not being a part of the game. Now, in the last, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years, some folks have figured out that if you take the battery, particularly one that's kind of old and needed some loving, and instead of putting it on a nice constant continuous charge, if instead what you do is you hit it with about 40 amps for about 1,000th of a second, or maybe 2,000ths of a second, and then stop, wait for a little bit, or go to a very low trickle charge, and then maybe a tenth or so of a second later, do it again. and you keep what's called burping the battery, that tends to help cause these guys to break up and dissolve back into solution. It's called burp charging. Now, my experience with burp charging, and particularly with an older dead battery, is you can rejuvenate them, but you can never bring them back to original capacity. I have not had the opportunity to play around with taking a new battery and using it sort of a normal cycle, and then maybe every 3 months burp charging it for a day or two. Just putting it on the trickle and burp charging it for a day or two, and then see if I can get 8 or 9 years out of the battery that way, rather than 5 or 6 years. Okay. So the hydrometer, we've talked about that. It's a very short boat with a really long mast. The FAA loves to ask some test questions about calibrating the scale based on temperature. So if I'm out there in Fargo, North Dakota, and it's a minus 50 degrees, yeah, don't you know, you're gonna need to calibrate your scale just a little bit, yeah. Okay, personally, I think that's a stupid question. It's a stupid series of questions. In terms of the real world, yes, scientifically, you do need to calibrate for changes in temperature because it affects density. But you're really just doing a very rough gauge. Is it in the red or is it in the green? And calibrating for a 50-degree shift is only going to move it by, I think it's 4 per 10 degrees or something. It isn't much. It's a small amount. So, for them to focus on that sort of focuses on the wrong thing. But, and like I say, I've got 2 different hydrometers. One that zeros at 70, another that zeros at 80. So I'm not quite sure. They do have, in fact, it may have been this one. This one yeah, here's one that sort of. This one has a little thermometer in there. Yeah, new and improved. A little thermometer sticks into there. So yeah, this one is zeroed at 80. Okay, I think the FAA test questions focus on 80 as well. So I think I did that one. It's because I went out in my toolbox and it says 70. It doesn't really matter where you put that as long as you're adjusting up or down from there. And this one, it's too hard to see, but I'm going to guess that it's 4 degrees per 10. You add if it's higher than temperature and subtract if it's lower. Okay, but truthfully, so here I'm at 32 degrees or something like that, and it says subtract 36 from 1125. Well, who cares? It's still red, right?
Right.
What are you going to do? You're going to pull it out and charge it either way, whether you subtract it or not, because it was in the red in both cases, right? So, but again, you guys need to be able to describe that. You will get asked those questions on the FAA test questions. It may show up on an oral practical as well. Okay, so.
You said the FAA answer is 80?
I think the FAA test question says you've got something at 40, at 60 degrees. What do you do to calibrate? And I think they're expecting it to be 80. Okay. So yeah, this just sort of shows the floating. Higher density means the floats higher. Lower means it sits down. All bets are off if the float's sitting on the bottom or it's sticking up so high that it's poked into the cork on top. The other thing is, again, they're sort of making a deal about eye level and not introducing parallax as well as the meniscus. Okay, I get it. I realize that. So the meniscus, instead of reading 1200, we're reading, looks like 1190. It's still not in the red. Okay, it's still not in the green. Even if I was off by, it's, you know. What would I say at that point? I'm gonna say that if I'm right about in here, it's probably charged. So it needs to be recharged if it's here, regardless of whether I read up here or read there. But for the FAA test questions, remember, okay, don't introduce parallax, don't introduce error from the meniscus. What causes the meniscus?
Air
Friction.
pressure on top.
It's really a function of capillary action. Anytime, particularly a super smooth surface,
Right up to
it
side.
wants the capillary action causes it to want to ride up a little bit. Okay.
Sorry, can you explain that again? Meniscus?
The meniscus, you see where how the water isn't flat,
Okay.
it
Oh.
curls up just a little bit.
Okay.
Gasoline's even worse. Alcohol is actually better than water is. It tends to lay a little bit flatter because of its specific viscosity. Oil tends to have a significant viscous. It's not directly correlated to viscosity, but it's a function of capillary action. And if I make a small enough tube, it'll draw the fluid all the way up and fill the tube. Capillary action. But working against gravity. Okay, so colder temperature or more acid will increase the reading. So however you memorize that, you need to be able to say, if I'm colder, I've got to subtract values. If I'm hotter, I've got to increase the value a little. And I just remember because if it's hotter, it's denser, it's less dense. It's got less dense, so therefore I'm gonna have to calibrate back to an increase in density. Now, and then of course, why does this thing work when the battery is down at, say, 24 degrees Fahrenheit?
Why does it work?
Yeah, why does it work? Why does it just freeze solid?
Oh, it's probably the freezing level of the acid is lower than.
Once we start dissolving something into it, we're gonna affect the freezing as well as the boiling point.
Freezing point lowers.
Yeah. So I think most of the time when you dissolve, boiling point goes higher and freezing point goes lower. But I don't know that's universal with everything you put in water. But I know like if you're making jams or jellies or candies, as you throw a bunch of sugar in there, now you can go up to like 230 degrees, 240 degrees before it starts to boil. Okay. So, as an almost universal rule, I say standard lead acid batteries. The truth is, all batteries should be charged at a pretty low rate if we want to increase their lifespan. The other thing, we talked a little bit about, we get in a hurry, slam it with some juice, start things up, and away we go. But the truth is, every time you go to start your engine, okay, I've just discharged the battery some. It's gonna take, and on your car you don't really know, but in my airplane, when I go to start the engine, it typically hits about 28 to 30 amps for a few minutes, and then it comes back down to its normal 14 to 15 amps. So initially, to recharge the battery, that or at least the AGM, lead acid is going to be a little bit different, but that battery will take 15 amps or so until it starts to get charged back up again. Now remember, the amount of current a battery will take is a function of the state of charge and the type of battery it is. Different types of battery have different internal resistances. The other thing that happens is as the battery gets really depleted, its internal resistance starts going way up. And it goes to the point that it's so high it'll almost not take a charge. I found really severely depleted batteries. Sometimes you have to throw them on a high rate of charge, high voltage, and let them sit for a couple of hours. You gotta watch them kind of closely. Let them sit for a couple of hours, and then all of a sudden you'll see the current start to go. It'll start to go, then turn it way back down. And I think it's a function of just so much plate area gets disengaged from the electrical circuit that it needs to sit there sort of being a little bit warm and charging before all of a sudden the plates start engaging in the chemical process. So we'd love it to be a very slow trickle charge. It's not the real world though. The other thing I see a common mistake is, and again, you don't really want to do this with airplanes, but in the auto industry, you'll see folks jump starting cars where, you know, pull the car that runs up there, hook the cables up, and the person grabs the key and goes rah, 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 right away. That's absolutely the worst thing you can do. Best thing in the world to do is hook them up. Always make sure that the negative lead of the discharged battery, of the charged battery, is the one that gets connected last. Okay. Then bring the power up. Okay, be at a low idle, so your alternator is actually not producing a lot of power. Then bring it up to a high idle. Okay, and let it run for about 5 or 10 minutes, charging, getting some juice back into the battery of the disabled vehicle. Okay. Otherwise, when you disconnect that battery, you're going to disconnect it from the charging vehicle. You're going to have an alternator dumping out way more than its capacity. So it'll sit in a state of what's called saturated current limiting capacity for a while, however long it takes, to start bringing the battery back up really, really hard in the charging system. In all likelihood, the battery that's being discharged, why is it being charged? Because the lights were left on. Okay, so it is super seriously depleted at discharge. Okay, the lights have been left on since they left for Madagascar a month ago. I don't know, does Madagascar actually exist? Wherever they went to, right? Yeah, or John Q. Idiot, I've never done this, left the master switch on. Okay, for 3 months. Oftentimes, those types of abuse, the battery, it kills the battery. The battery is more than 2 or 3 years old, that often will kill it. No amount of trying to get it to charge will cause it to come back. Oh yeah, so I guess I did throw a slide in there about burp charging. Burp charging, desulfators, essentially what we're going to do is, and it's sort of an interesting circuit. We'll take the battery voltage and we'll send it over to a capacitor for a brief period of time. That capacitor can put out a whole lot of current over a very short few microseconds. Then we'll let the capacitor discharge into the battery. Then we'll recharge the capacitor and let it discharge into the battery. So what we're doing is we're pulsing or burping the battery. And if you look at it on an oscilloscope, you'll see voltage potential or current potential going off, big jump, off. And in here, we're looking at, this is going to be in milliseconds. So in this one, we're actually going to go 25 thousandths of a second at approximately 55 amps. And then again, 25 or 26 off, and then on, and then off, and then on, and then off. Now, of course, the voltage will be way up, and this is a per cell voltage, it looks like. And then this is what the battery is trying to produce on its own. That's what the charger is trying to do. But the key is we're flash pulsing it with a high amount of current, very, very, very briefly. And what that does is it helps to break up the macronucleation. Now also note, this just shows a new battery in a state of discharge after 1,000 cycles in a state of discharge, after 2,000 cycles in a state of discharge. Also note the term cycles. Differing batteries behave very differently in terms of a charging cycle. So many types of batteries they don't do well being partially discharged and recharged. Okay, it causes them to lose capacity fairly quickly. Fortunately, a lead acid battery is one that it doesn't care. It's it's got a finite amount of time that it's going to work, give or take a little. Usually anywhere from 3 to 5 years. We'll talk about the other battery types with respect to that memory problem. It's really not memory, but. So let's see, I did restore, in fact, it might be one of those ones that's still in service. I did pull out a burp charger, pulse charger, and threw it on one of those batteries all summer. Just a small amount of current, just, overall a small amount of current. I let it go, came back in, checked it once in a while to make sure the electrolyte hadn't gone down any. And I actually got it to start playing again. It would actually take a charge and behave fairly normally. Now, I'm sure its capacity as a battery was greatly diminished. But, if I was down there where the natives are restless and I had to have something just to get it started and get me home, I would certainly have used it. So, some of the important values with respect to batteries. Remember, we talked a little bit about their different mission profiles for batteries. We have to talk about what are some of the parameters around which a battery can be measured. Obviously, we've said voltage matters. And we said voltage is going to be a function of the galvanic nature, the relationship between the two dissimilar metals, and the type of electrolyte being used. No amount of anything else is going to change that. Well, if I'm using that lead and the lead peroxide, 37% hydrosulfuric acid, I can make the plates big, small, large, deep, whatever. It's going to be the same voltage. However, the amount of work or the amount of electrons that the battery can deliver is going to be a function of plate area. Okay? So if I make more and more and more bigger parking lot plates, then the number of electrons or amps that it can produce per hour. Okay, so we're going to call that amp hours. So that could be 1 amp of current for 27 hours or 27 amps of current for 1 hour. However you throw that out there. That's going to be almost exclusively a function of the surface area of the plates. Okay. More bigger cells, more number of plates all connected. Now, if I want higher voltage, I connect the plates in series. The more plates in parallel, thicker, etc., I get more amp hours. So, if 27 amp hours is good, why not make it 54 amp hours? Because it's twice as much lead. It's heavy. Okay. We hopefully want this airplane to actually get airborne at the end of the runway. So I'm only going to make it big enough to meet the needs that I'm sort of designing it for over the lifespan that I'm designing it for. All right. The second quality is going to be a quality or characteristic of a battery that's used in a high current application. Okay. Cold cranking amps is one way of measuring total maximum output per unit of time. There are other ways of doing it. And that's going to be true of all lead acid batteries. But in a battery that's meant to be a starting battery, it's going to be really important. In a battery that's meant to be a deep cycle battery that puts out a small amount of current, but it keeps your light bulb and toaster or whatever you've got on your boat or motorhome running for a long, long time. That we don't really care about the cold cranking amps. It still applies, we just don't care about it. So in the case of a battery used to run a starter, we're going to create some parameters. Okay, how many amps can this thing produce over a period of time without dropping below a voltage at some various temperature. Now, I threw these out there because one of the standards that exist picks 0 degrees, picks 30-second, picks the floor of 7.2 volts. So, so how many amps will it put out? Okay, there are other standards, unfortunately. So, when they say cold cranking amps, one battery manufacturer might be doing something slightly different than another. But it's fairly typical to see like a value, 350 or 440 cold cranking amps. What they're really trying to do is say, will your starter go wah, 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 bum, and start things up when it's really cold? Okay. The battery still may have 27 amp hours, but it won't put out enough amperage to run your starter in a given period of time at, minus 25 degrees. Okay. So, cold cranking amps is going to decline as a result of the state of charge. It's going to decline as the state of age of the battery. And in fact, the fact that this declines is another way to help assess the condition of the battery. Okay, so I get a battery. It's here. Pull out the electrolyte, look at it, hydrometer. Oh, it's pretty discharged. Okay, now one of you guys had yucky Ucco dark stiller, dark charcoal yucco in the fluid, right? That's probably a cell that's been charring and burning a little bit. However, so that would be another data point, right? On the other hand, you pull it up, all the fluid's good, electrolyte says it's discharged a little bit. Logbooks say it's about 4.5, 5 years old. Throw it on the charger. Charge that puppy up overnight. It'll look really good. Hydrometer reading's really good. 12.9 volts. It's just, really up there. It's really, really good. Okay. The last thing you're going to want to do is put it through a cold cranking amp situation. Now you could use your starter, however it's going to wear your starter out, or you could use what's called the load tester. Now what a load tester is you're just going to dead short the battery. Now, if you do that with a crescent wrench, you're going to damage your crescent wrench. It's going to get real hot. Whatever you do when you're dead short the battery, it's going to be a dead short. So it's going to get hot. So it's better to use a tool that has a big heating element sort of contained in a safe box. And in parallel, you're going to put a voltmeter there. And you're going to hook it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Does it go down into the red? Right? Now, what I will tell you is that scale is sort of stupid on the voltmeter. What happens with the truly shorted cell is you go 1 click, boom. I mean, it just drops because, it'll drop, immediately drop very, very quickly because one or more cells are shorted. They can't put out anything. So you immediately gone from sort of a vague 12.5 volts down to 8 volts or some other value. It's going to drop really, really quickly. Okay? That tells you that in spite of the fact that it charged, in spite of the fact that the fluid looked okay and I got everything looking good, there is some internal shorting down in the battery, and this battery needs to be taken out of service. Unfortunately, with fully sealed batteries, which many or most of them are, your only real option, because you can't get in there to measure hydrometer, right? Mm-hmm. So the best thing you can do is try to charge it appropriately, and then hit it with a load tester. If it isn't working, it'll tell you pretty quickly. So a load tester is just short. I have one in here. This is an antique tool. This was actually for use in the days when lead acid batteries, the way we made them, was we take the battery and it had this case, put all the plates in there, and then put these little interconnects in there, fill all the lead acid up to a certain level above the plates, and then take hot tar and float it on top of the water, the liquid that's in there. The hot tar is going to float and then seal that whole cell. Okay? And anytime you had battery troubles, you would go to the battery shop. They would heat the tar out and recondition it or do whatever they needed to do to fix it. This comes from those times. So we're talking 20s, 30s. 1920s and 30s, not 20s and 30s. What these two electrodes were is you tested each cell individually because they would repair each cell individually. So you actually drive that through the tar and catch either side, either side of the cell, okay, and note it reads from 1 to 2.5 and a nice big heating element in there. So you just dive that in there, this guy'd start getting hot. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if it drops down below, they've got a little thing here that says dead, discharge, charge. Okay, so if it would drop below, yep, that cell's okay, that cell's okay, that cell's okay. Oh, that one's not good. Let's heat that tar up, pull the tar off of there, pull all the lead out of there, flush everything out of that cell, and they'd fix that one cell. Now, of course, you gotta know that these old battery shops were like toxic waste dumps. Probably not the cleanest, safest place to work in. This comes to the days before OSHA.
OSHA.
I think it's coming cool. Nowadays, since you can't get in there, you've just got what I've got, like the one I've got, it's made by Blue Point, which is Snap-on's auxiliary company. It's just a handle with a big metal box. 2 big cables come out with 2 big battery clamps. Clamp on positive, negative. It's got a voltmeter and a big switch. And inside the metal box, it's just a big toaster element. Okay, and after about 10 seconds, it gets bright red. Okay, and you've got the little meter going.
That places the load on it, right?
Yeah, it's just like hitting it with a
Big-
starter.
Big resistor.
Yeah, it's just a big toaster element, right? Question.
Yeah, I had a question for the function of plate surface area. I don't know what porosity means. That's
So, the amount of plate surface area available to the electrolyte.
Okay.
So if I take this, and just make it like that, it doesn't have much surface area. But if I spread it out real thin and open the inside, I've got more surface area. In fact, if I turn this into a bunch of little bitty strings, and then sort of fold all that up and it's very porous, now I've got a whole bunch of surface area. That will allow for a very high rate or high degree of chemical reaction occurring between the electrolyte and the lead peroxide, which will cause a much higher cold cranking amp. The problem is it will be so fragile that if I deeply deplete it, it'll have a tendency to disintegrate pretty
It'll
quickly
crack,
and not
fall
last
apart.
very long.
okay.
So if I design the mission profile around high cold cranking amps, I'm gonna say, great, works well, but don't ever take it more than about 25% discharge. If I want it to really deep cycle, I'm gonna put a whole lot more plate area in there, but I'm gonna make it structurally a lot more robust and sound so that it can deeply discharge without structurally falling apart on us, particularly on the recharge.
This is changing the thickness of the sheets.
The entire nature and structure of the sheets, yeah.
Okay.
So like the ship's batteries are generally,
Well, ship's auxiliary batteries.
auxiliary
A
batteries.
lot of times on
Big.
mini big boats, as well as motorhomes,
They're huge.
they'll have the deep cycle batteries.
Yeah.
And then they'll have the starter battery.
Yeah.
Starter batteries, high cold cranking amp. Main sort of auxiliary battery there for your light bulbs and everything else, that's a deep cycle battery.
Okay.
They're usually also quite a bit bigger. And then they may have one or more charging systems, and the charging system will have to appropriately address both of those battery types differently. Okay, so you may have a main bus that the charging system is hooked to, and 2 different charging supplies with different regulators coming off to the battery on that type of a complex system. We don't really do that in aviation, because when an airplane lands, what do? You get out and go somewhere. Okay, rarely do you pull into an airplane and throw out the canopy and the awning and and right, set up shop. Yeah, we don't do that so much. Or tie it up to the dock and moor and start cooking hot dogs.
Do on those deep cycles, do you service them the same way, or are they just?
So
for the
actually, a
motorhomes?
lot of your, particularly your big marine deep cycle batteries, they are all serviceable, and they're intended to last quite a bit longer. They're expensive. They're pricey. Okay, they're like $400 or $500 a pop. Yeah, they're really.
How many amps do they draw?
Well, so their amp hours are going to be a lot higher. Cold cranking amps will be low, but their amp hours might be 300 amp hours. Okay, the big 8D cell casing. And by the way, I don't teach too much about casing parameters. They have a whole bunch of standards for different case dimensions and the electrodes. Typically, we have different electrode size, positive and negative, but we're all over the map in the automotive industry and the aviation. In the aviation industry, we typically don't use lead posts. We use quarter 20 bolts with a stud sticking up, which is kind of like what you see out there. And they're both the same size.
Just make sure I'm getting this right. So 300 amp hour would be 1 amp for 300 hours. Is that
Or 300 amps per 1 hour, up to whatever its cold cranking value is. Or 150 amps for 2 hours, or 75 amps for 4 hours.
what it's required
Or
for?
whatever, yeah. So we use amp hour because it really isn't power. Power requires a unit of time. And we're not here. We're really just saying it can produce X number of amps for X number of hours. So we come up with the term amp hour.
The high amp hour is the deep cycle.
Well, high amp hour means it will produce more electrons. Okay, the parking lot's bigger, but it doesn't necessarily mean it can deliver them at a high rate.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Just for longer though, that's all.
Well, yeah. Typically, the idea is to make it for longer,
Right.
but the truth is, I could bring, if it's a
Guess that
deep
might-
cycle battery, I could probably, even though it's cold cranking amps isn't 450, maybe it's only 225. I'd still bring it up to 225. Okay, and now it isn't going to last. It's it's going to last an hour or two. Okay,
Are they recycling any part of?
all battery materials are recyclable. As far as I know.
Even the plate itself?
Yeah.
They can melt the plate down and make a new plate?
All battery materials are recyclable.
Okay.
So not to get too off subject, but what about the solar? When they're charging, are those
We haven't got to solar yet. We will. Okay, the whole
Go
different
ahead,
section.
John.
That's photovoltaic and stuff.
Yeah, we'll get into photovoltaic.
Yeah, like wires.
I was going to jump over there, but I figured let's just go through batteries. Then we'll back up to AC theory and some of the other ones. I think at the end of this, I do get into photovoltaic a little bit. Okay. So yeah, there's a picture of a load tester. Okay. So the load tester, it's just got a big toaster element in there and a little voltmeter. That shows the voltmeter. And a couple of big clamps. They have these sort of weird little copper things for the different type of terminals that auto batteries use. So we'll just throw it, it's got to be charged. Doesn't work if it's not charged. We'll throw it on there. And this is showing the charging system. Okay, the battery can't go higher than this. So the charging system will have to. So I put it on there, start the engine, and if the charging system is up this way, then I know the charging system's working. Okay, that's a handy dandy feature. All this is a voltmeter though. So I'm gonna hook it up, set it up here, I'm gonna be there. They didn't give you different scales for whether it's 1,000 amp hour cold cranking or 1,000 amps cold cranking, I don't know, 800, 500, 400, 200. So this is sort of cold cranking amps. The truth is, this sort of doesn't mean much. This scale is if it's a 6-volt battery. In truth, what's going to happen is you'll set it there, you hold the button down. 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, it's good. You look in the back. Oh yeah, put your piece of toast there. Okay, light your cigarette, whatever you're doing. Okay, it's going to be bright red. Or it's a bad battery, it's shorted. You go click, goes. If it's really shorted, it just goes snap.
Okay, so it's obvious.
Okay, bottoms out instantly. It's going to happen. So that's why I think the sort of finite resolution they put out there, yeah, it's nice. It makes it look like what you're doing is really scientific. But a truly shorted cell, it's going to boom. So now note that for this particular unit, they say leave the switch on for 10 seconds. But the other cold cranking amp spec was 30 seconds. So there's different scales to measure this by, but what you're trying to do is create a go, no-go situation. And so the first go, no-go test is it charged? And will it charge? If it will charge, the next go, no test is it's charged, load test it. Okay? Load test then passes that, maybe it's okay. Start checking for other problems. Okay? The glove box light doesn't turn out. Okay, master switch, you think it's off, but it really isn't. Okay. All right, a couple of slides and then we'll call it quits. So we'll take our break. So again, the most common cause of failure, and it's truly just a function of time. If it's a cheap battery, 3 years. If it's an expensive battery, 5, 6 years, something like that. It's gonna wear out. They'll typically fail in 1, sometimes 2 cells. Usually it shorts at the bottom of the cell. All the crud that's coming down, starts filtering down to here, and as it gets high enough, it eventually starts contacting the bottom of the plates. We said it wasn't very conductive, but it's enough conductive to where then what happens is the individual plates, they just start discharging through themselves
Internally.
through the circuit, right? But then what can happen is the other cells can also start discharging through that. Okay? So it does get to looking very nasty in there. It's just like, well, you think you didn't want to drink the lead acid water before. Now you're looking at it like, ooh. The other thing that you'll see, if it's truly shorted, it'll produce a bunch of heat in and around that short. So while it's charging or discharging, you'll see a bunch of bubbling, particularly when you hit the load tester. So one of the things I do if it's the type of battery where I can pull the caps off, put the load tester on there, get ready to go, boom, and then look. And if I see it starting to go, then I start looking for the cell. And sure enough, one of them will start bubbling and kind of like the witch's cauldron, right? Now at that point, you have compellingly identified, not only do I have battery load test behavior that shows a discharge or a shorted cell, but I can actually see the cell behaving in a shorted manner. At that point, I have absolutely no qualms about taking the battery out of service. Don't bury it in the back. Okay? It's hazardous material. Truly, appropriately recycle it. All right. Another common failure is the plates either get broken or the posts get broken. Okay? Somebody decides, well, we don't actually have to loosen it before we get the cable off the end of it, right? Probably not a good way to go. They do tend to get pretty corroded, so sometimes that bolt, you're done. You can't, right? Well, you're going to have to figure out a way to cut through that bolt, get it off, open the lead, and correctly pop it off the top of the battery. If you try to twist it off in a tightened condition, you will fracture. You'll do 2 things. The post coming up out of there, you'll fracture it from the plate, but you'll also delaminate it from the plastic surrounding. So now vapors can wick up around there, and that battery terminal it's going to last you a month or 2 before it corrodes off with the acid percolating up through there. So if you deseal the post as it comes through the case, that's, it's going to be a huge problem. They sell those cool little felt things that you can stick underneath there in the automobile batteries.
Yeah. Those good?
Yeah.
Those good?
Waste of time.
Those little cool things. If you need those, there's something wrong. You're fixing a problem. You're putting a symptom over a problem.
I thought they give those when you get the new battery. A lot of times they're with the new battery.
They might, but if it's leaking there, it's leaking there.
No.
It shouldn't be leaking there. So if the battery manufacturer has to give you those to make it work right, buy a different battery. Okay, it's leaking there. It shouldn't leak there. Okay. So the posts can also corrode pretty readily. Actually, one of these posts, I had to drill a hole and drop a roll pin in there. That post, I know there must have been a leak up around through the lead and up around into the steel bolt or the steel stud sticking out. That post corroded off within about 2 weeks of installing the acid in the battery. I probably should have called it truce and said, "Bad, send me a new one," but I didn't. Okay. So, their primary danger is they can't go boom. And believe me, I've seen it. I kid you not, the top half of the battery was in orbit for at least 10 seconds. I mean, it went off. Bam!
Very loud.
And I was on the phone. The window rattled real hard. I said, "Explosion, gotta go." Just dropped the phone, took off out, around, and to the front of the vehicle was a car. Looked in there, saw the bottom half of the battery, and it was shredded. And acid, battery, liquid acid was everywhere. And I'm like, "Oh my God!" And then, boom, 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 boom. The top came down and landed about 10 feet away from me. That's how long it was up there going. 2001 Space Odyssey, right?
The monolith.
Up there twirling around, flinging acid everywhere. Acid and chunks of lead. I was looking that way. I did not see a flash. However, hydrogen typically isn't going to make.
It burns too fast to see that.
Well, and it's too clear. So there may not have been a flash. So I don't know whether it was it pressurized or it was a combustion explosion or some mix of both. The only thing I do know is it wasn't me that hooked the battery charger up to the battery in the car. It was the boss who did it. So that was the first thing out of my mouth. "I didn't hook it up, boss, you did." He was running towards it. I was literally as fast as I could go with a garden hose, full on blasting everything, and it was too late. It had damaged the paint already. Just enough to kind of burn the sheen a little bit. The car had to be completely repainted, and that was expensive. There are some secondary concerns. You can zap yourself. I've been there and I've done it. It's a little dirty. It's maybe a little bit wet. And you're sitting there and you're kind of leaning way out over to putting a lot of pressure on your arm right there across both of those terminals, and all of a sudden, zing! Ow. Believe me, take a 9-volt battery and put it to your tongue and see what it tastes like. 12 volts can zap you. I've literally gotten burnt spot on doing exactly that, leaning out over without a fender cover, and it was just dirty enough that as I put enough pressure, it suddenly started conducting. Okay. More likely what's going to happen is, okay, you're going to be sitting there and you sort of get your fender cover and you're doing this, and you set this there, and then you set this there, and that wrench is there, and then you do that, and then you do that, and the wrench goes thunk. Sparksing, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Have I ever done that?
Isn't that a good load test?
Huh?
That's a good load test, right?
Well, what I will tell you is a Snap-on guy ain't going to replace your wrench.
You won't, huh?
Oh.
You need 10 seconds.
No, the first thing they're going to do is look for charge spots, right? Okay, any charge spots? No, not going to replace it.
Damn it.
Okay,
So it was like
No.
yeah.
Depends on how you damage it.
you pay a lot of money for them.
I'm not a fan of Snap-on tools anyway. So yeah, there's we'll quit on this one. There's an example of a battery that decided
Blow
to
up.
send parts of itself into orbit.
Positive release.
Again, no way of knowing. Did the vents get plugged and it built up pressure and went kaboom?
Yeah.
Or did enough hydrogen and oxygen get formed in there and it somehow got ignited and went boom? Either way, it's evident that it went boom. Okay.
Is that positive relief valve or pressurization relief valve? PRV?
Well, again, it depends on the type of battery. These little lead acid batteries you're dealing with, they don't have, they just have a vent a vent valve, but they don't keep it at a positive rate of pressure. All your AGMs, all your other sealed cells, gel cells, they actually use a PRV and keep the pressure something above ambient. It's not much. So if one of those got plugged,
But it's, yeah,
theoretically, you could build up enough pressure to cause it to go boom. Those plastics is sort of a Nalgene type polyurethane plastic. That's pretty tough stuff. So it could probably build up a fair amount of pressure before it finally ruptured. And it's a function of how much pressure you can hold before it fails. Okay, that determines how big the boom is. Okay, if it fails at say 1 psi, it's going to go poof. Okay, it's going to be kind of like a fart, right? Not much there, right? On the other hand, if it can get up to 50 or 60 psi before it goes, now when it releases, it's going to release quite a bit more force.
Right.
Or, like a scuba tank gets up to 3,000 or 4,000 psi when it fails. Now it's just going to shred. Okay, it's going to shred everything and anything in its path. This one, I don't know what it got up to or whether it was combustion. I know I wouldn't want to be anywhere near it when it went. Partly because of shrapnel, partly because there's electrolytic acid flying everywhere, right? As well as lead sulfate, and a bunch of other probably pretty toxic stuff.
This is probably a stupid question. Both posts look the same. What makes the one side positive, one side negative? Just the cathode?
It's a little hard to tell, but usually the smaller post is positive, the larger post is negative.
Okay.
In the world of automobile batteries.
Okay, but what in the battery is making one side positive, one side negative? Is it the difference in materials?
It's the anode and the cathode.
Okay.
So one's lead peroxide, one's lead.
Lead.
In that particular case.
Can you tell by looking at it which one's which?
I think the lead, well, you can't on that one because it looks like it's all lead sulfate. But as I remember, the lead peroxide is the one that looks a little reddish.
Okay.
And the pure lead just looks like pure lead.
Okay.
Okay. The truth is, we don't care because we're hopefully never looking in there.
Right. I'm just curious how.
And if we are, it's going to be, because stuff's coming back out of the sky. Yeah, I don't remember where I got that picture, but the one that I saw go, the end pieces here stayed with the battery in here, and the two inner sets of plates went with the top upwards. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 pounds of lead went up into the air for quite a few seconds.
Pretty good pop.
Oh yeah, it was like, it was enough to where the window did boom, and I'm like, holy crap, explosion, gotta go. I didn't, to me it was a big enough explosion, it's like, incoming. The Russians are attacking, right? It was a big explosion. I got out there and this shredded battery, it's like, oh my Lord. So truly, I'm beating this up a little bit, but really, to properly service a battery, you have to pull it out of the vehicle. Okay, now imagine if this had been the tail cone of an airplane when it did that. I mean, that's it. That airplane would have been done. Okay, not only would it have ruptured the tail cone, but it would have blown battery acid all throughout the inside of the airplane, right?
So when you see a car burning on the side of the road, is the chances are it's the battery that caused
Well, the battery or chafed wire.
a chafed wire?
Yeah, chafed
Okay.
wire, dead shorted, and it's
Okay.
a chafed wire that's very close to the battery. So like the main battery lead over to the starter,
Okay.
something
And
like
possibly
that.
some fume.
Now it's also possible a gas leak out on the hot exhaust.
Mhm. Okay.
It's going to be kind of one of those two things. So, all right. So we ran a little bit long. So how about we come back at say 1900? So go grab your dinner. When we come back at 1900, we'll go take the next reading.
Shit hot.
I think it's a lot of the fires that you see, I think, start
What?
from the cars on the side.
What?
From the cars on the side of the road.
Yeah.
As they, I know.
They just go kaboom. Because they can't. Isn't that coffee like a little on the,
Thank you though.
way too much cream on it?
Dying.
Diane, what were you doing today?
Where'd you come
Well, I
in from,
flew
dude?
in from Chicago this morning.
You did. I came in last night from Chicago. Was it still snowing?
Still snowing?
Yes.
Weather?
Dude, I'm
So-
sitting there and I'm sitting there this morning and I had my cup of coffee.
I'll wait till class.
and
Apparently
I'm
Southwest
half
Air
awake-
half
awake.
ran out of
And we had
antifreeze.
we had to go get the ice
No
this
de-icing
morning.
going
on?
I'm sitting on the
Canceled
pad.
220
I look
flights.
down. I'm like,
That's
you
bad.
fucking serious?
For lack of.
Glycol's dripping in my
Ice.
coffee this
Like,
morning.
That's
I was
that's a
like,
head gonna roll career.
Yes.
career
That's Chicago.
We have a new VP position
Saturday.
open.
Saturday.
Monday.
Sunday morning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sunday morning, me trying
yeah.
to get out of frickin'
Somebody
Chicago.
screwed up.
Yeah.
No, I got there.
I didn't hear that.
I got there
It happened
Sunday
today.
night, and I'm walking.
Well,
down
it was
there to the
yesterday.
hotel. I got off the
Yesterday they
hotel
canceled a bunch of flights.
Oh, yeah.
And then it turned out-
I wasn't thinking about. So I was trying to do.
No
something.
de-icing.
'Cause I have a. I had my sweater on, but you
Which,
know, like we have a choice.
220
Skywest,
flights,
you can
it's
either wear-
probably not
you
all
can either
Chicago
wear
Midway.
our,
It's,
trench coat.
you know, it's
and
everywhere.
Our
Uh,
jacket or
Which
Somebody
means-
forgot to
Yeah,
pay
go.
the supplier and get
or
that
I can wear a leather
contract.
jacket.
well, we don't
So I
know,
had
was it on the
sweaters on
south
the
side,
jacket.
the supplier
But-
side, somewhere?
It was windy. It was
But
freezing.
whatever the
so it was
issue is.
all just coming up here, so I was trying to.
Or
get
they
down
just
a
had so
little
darn
bit.
much icing going on that
Busted my ass.
Boston,
they,
yeah.
they just
Busted
ran
my
out.
ass.
Good.
Didn't see it coming, yeah.
What do you think, Rod? The Southwest went tank dry on anyways.
When? Where?
Yesterday, Chicago Midway, canceled
What do
220
you think
flights.
that is? They ran out of fluid?
Run of fluid, huh? Well, this is kind of a late, I mean, I don't
Because
know.
nobody else is at Midway. They can't go
I know.
borrow it from somebody.
Yeah,
The
nobody's
trucks
at.
were-
Yeah, nobody's at Midway
The
except.
trucks were going full bore on
They were full
Sunday.
bore when we. I had glycol dripping my coffee this morning.
Oh, it's a bad taste.
I was sitting there. I'm sitting at the window. We're on the pad. I'm sitting there. We're doing our checks, and all of a sudden I look down and I'm like, "Oh man, there's glycol dripping in the window."
at Starbucks. Is it a head
FedEx,
on?
FedEx has a short video. A buddy of mine flies for him. He shared a short video with me. It's one of the 777s that had been sitting out in freezing rain. They're like, oh crap, we got to fly. So they brought it into the hangar,
And heated
and
up.
it's sitting, and they're sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and all of a sudden the whole airplane just goes, and all of this ice comes sliding. You can't really see it because it's like this thick,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Wow.
It all comes sliding off at once.
Wow.
And it's just this huge, this crash in the hangar, because all this ice comes ripping down.
That might weigh a bunch.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, I got a question for you. Did you take Paul's class and the sheet metal class?
No, I haven't.
He's just like a, does he give this shit out? You've had him for another class.
I've had him from other classes. Yeah.
Okay, does he do this all the time, like homework assignments?
Yes. Yes.
And then are those like pretty close to what you're gonna send test them?
Yeah. And he actually gives like questions. He gives like a bank of questions.
Oh, it does?
That's gonna be on the test. It's like 500. It's like taking an FA written test. He gives like a bank of 500 questions that might be on his test.
Might be.
Paul gives a lot of information. He's like information overload.
Yeah.
He really does. Like, I dread. When I go back to his class, I might just take one at a time because
Okay,
he's.
There it is. Wait. Okay, where's absent turners make up? There is no excuse absences. Dick. In this course, you will be allowed to make up maximum accumulation of one class. So I missed the first two classes last week.
He's not that. He's not like when I took his class, he worked with me. Like,
Okay.
And the thing is, like, sheet metal's really
Oh.
hard.
Look at this. Okay, so an appointment to make up missed is required 1 week prior. So if it happened in the second week, there was no way I could make it up. So I came in.
You have to work like.
Well, I came in. I said I'm here. You know, I sent him an email. I said I'm here because I knew I was leaving for Dallas,
Mhm.
and I'm here like for 2 hours prior to leaving for my trip. And he's basically said, I'm not going to take your. I did a time card, and he said, well, that's not the right time card. And what was I thinking? He just gave me this stern freaking lecture. And I go, talk about my we'll talk about my motivation or what, you know, whatever. I want to slap the guy. I really do. So I might.
Talk to you?
I'm going to have a heart to heart with him before, because this is 2 strikes against him. One more, I'm gonna unload on him, big time.
Yeah, you really like when I
I
had it, because I missed like 4 classes during summer school,
Yeah,
and it was summer school, so like you can't miss any
You can't.
classes. And he worked with me. He ended up working with me, but I had to like go in and like really like talk to him.
I'm not sucking up to him.
And I wasn't sucking up, but I was just like, you
I'm
know,
just
I just I said, look, like I'm trying to do this, but
So I
you have
come,
to
yeah,
understand, like, you know, this is my life, like this is what's going. And you have like I try to put myself in his shoes too, because, you know, it's like he does work with a bunch of fucking idiots. Bunch of fucking idiots too. I mean,
Well,
you
yeah,
gotta
but-
see
yeah.
things from both sides of the
Oh.
story. I mean, like, you can imagine all the bullshit excuses he gets to. Like, you can just imagine the stories
be
he
assigned work.
hears.
But here's how the student will be assigned work at the beginning of the makeup period. Missed time may only be made up in 1 hour or greater increments during the instructor's. He's making it so freaking hard. So basically, I got a time card. I didn't see him. He was here, but I think he was teaching. So I had Mr. Boozer sign me in, and he got all freaking up in arms about that too. And I'm going, well, listen, pal, I can't. I can't. If you're not responding to my email, I just show up and I just did exactly what I said I was going to do in my email. I showed up, I punched in, I sat here and did some work, and
I would hang on to it because chances are I was going to probably forget about it by the end of the
Well.
semester too. Like, you know, and
I
just,
don't. I'm just hoping he doesn't teach that many classes.
he's like all airframe. He's like the
Yeah.
airframe dude.
Yeah.
Like Lonnie's the guy for Powerplant.
Yeah.
Like that's why I'm
Makeup time must
finishing
be
Powerplant.
quick
Like
with backside.
especially with this first semester of me being back at work. Like I'm with Powerplant. Like today I walked in all
Oh.
late and Lonnie's like, nice outfit. Are you a TSA agent?
He gave you a hard time.
Okay, so this is what got me. Makeup time must be recorded on the backside. I had it on the front. So we actually got to sign in, punch in for our regular classes, too.
Yeah, I guess.
No, you don't. That's the class tomorrow, right? You got tomorrow.
Makeup time must be recorded on the backside at the same time card used to record regular class times. So when did we start?
Oh, well, I've never heard of that
When did we
before.
start signing in for
For a regular class. I guess instead of him doing a roll call, you just punch it in. So I didn't catch the whole thing. You actually had
I came in last Tuesday, but I just didn't file on it. So I sent an email to them, and trying to make up some time coming in today, about 12 minutes, make a couple hours. I come in, I didn't see him, grab a time card.
I think I was here when you came in.
Yeah, you were here.
Yeah, I was here.
I talked to Boozer.
Yeah.
And Boozer signed me in.
Yeah, I was talking to Boozer back to Texas.
So later that day, I go in and I show him, I'm trying to get the homework. He hands out questions for homework.
Okay.
And I'm doing one of them inside one of the classes. I go on the other two. He just started reading it right at me. Just kind of like he said, the way he started out is like, I need to make this a little more sterner. I said, you're only allowed to make up one class. And I said, you know, are you questioning my motivation to be here? Or what are you saying? Only because I've had a couple run-ins with him. And I'm wondering if it's just our
No,
personality.
well, yeah, because he's looking at the heat mask trying to walk across.
Oh, I did, yeah, he looked at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything I had out there. I was like, oh.
Yeah, were you with me?
No, I was in a separate time. I went to go see Hank, and there was nobody in there. Nobody had even gone in there. It was like custodian. It was
Yeah.
open, so I just and he saw me.
Yeah.
I'm like, Jesus! I said I got a top secret clearance for nuclear weapons in the Air Force. I told him that, and he just goes. He didn't say anything. He just got pissed off. He was like, Jesus, dude, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm new here.
Maybe he'll chill.
Well, the thing is, you know, I've done a lot of shit in my life, so I'd like some sort of respect. Like, I don't want to be talked to like a complete moron.
But that's how he's coming on to us.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah,
just-
and
I'm not-
it's like irritating because it's like
It's
Look,
like,
I understand you deal with dumbasses, I do see them.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
walk past them, trust me, I do notice them. I'm not blind either.
Exactly.
But yeah, dude, like, I fly $30 million jets for a living,
Right.
please don't talk to me like I'm an idiot.
like, don't talk to me like I'm a total asshole.
Yeah,
So I'm
exactly.
gonna, I'm giving him one more strike. If he does, I'm blowing up. I'm gonna come, I'm glued on.
Then you might wanna just not go to class.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I might not even need to do it again.
Right.
I'm just wondering, is there anybody else that teaches right
No,
now?
there's not, that's the problem. When you look at the when you look at the catalog, it's
Yeah.
just, it's him on all this.
He's like the air. Yeah.
What's that?
Classes with him.
4 classes?
You have to wait for him to retire.
He's the air
He's
franchise.
retiring soon, I know
He
that.
is, he is.
Aren't they all?
Huh?
Aren't they all? I don't know. But
Not set it up.
that's it.
I mean, like, you can avoid cabin with him and take it with Hickman.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
can avoid
You
that.
can take Hickman.
Yeah, you can take Hickman with cabin. But he's like the sheet metal guy.
Can't get
He's-
around him.
You can avoid hydraulics with him and landing gear with him because sometimes Lyle teaches it.
Yeah, I'll go.
Sometimes Lyle goes back and forth.
You have Lyle yet?
No, he's been.
It depends on the semester, but sometimes Lyle teaches it.
That's
And I know that
That's
because
the
I've
difference.
talked to Lyle.
He's now become refueled. I met him down there.
Oh, yeah?
He's got his own shop.
Yeah, he works at Gibbs and
He
Henry.
works at Gibbs, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, did you guys hear that Fran died?
He's
no.
Fran Barrett?
really? I've heard
She's
of
like
her.
the original 99.
And she was like, how old was she? Was she 100? She has to be.
99.
She's 99. And she started the
Almost
She was
99.
like the first female DPE.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've heard of her name in town, but you know, I never met her.
No, she was like that woman whenever she would do the Powerplant derbies and stuff.
No.
She would like, whenever she'd do the races and stuff, she'd turn off her transponder and just go trucking through the class Bravo to win. And then pop up, whoop, here's Fran, turn it back on and win a race.
She got waivers.
She's like, fuck this.
Oh my goodness.
You know, back when they couldn't tell, this is the 70s, you turn your transponder off.
Right,
It wasn't
yeah.
even class Bravo, fucking
Yeah.
Tursa. You know?
Today you pull that.
Don't know who
You
you
get
are,
shot down
fucking.
in flames.
You met with shotguns if you land. You know, like, get
It's
out of the
true.
way.
It's
They
true.
did that to Martha King.
They handcuff her?
Yeah, because remember it
She
was
has a
a
citation, right?
no, they have Falcons, but it was
Oh, they've been doing better.
she had picked up a brand new plane from Wichita, and it had a tail number from a plane that had been reported stolen, and the cops never
Oh, wow, drama.
they never had caught up with the fact that they had done recirculate. They had never caught up with the fact that they recycled that tail number,
Mm-hmm.
and so when she landed, it had her.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, bad Martha, bad Martha.
Bad Martha. And it's so funny, you watch the video, you see Martha King with a little hair.
Yeah, she has the one. Do you still have Ron McDonald here? Yeah.
Changed that hair in 30 years.
It's never. Yeah, it's
It's-
is
I-
it orange. It's orange. I've
And
never
it's
seen
like
it.
brown. It's
Brown,
like brown.
okay.
But I remember like when I was 16,
She looks-
watching the King videos,
Yeah.
and you watch the new updated videos now, they do some of the ones with same hair, new hairstyle. They're just
Yeah.
older.
They,
They
I was
look
saying,
older,
did
the
they-
same
I was
hairstyle.
gonna say, did they change? Because she seems to not age.
No, they showed up on like a couple years ago. They showed up to one of the +1 CFI meetings, and they
Yeah.
look, you know, pretty much the same.
So yeah, they just
They just
they're both in scenarios like this.
Because
They've
they
been doing it forever.
yeah. Because I actually talked to John King a little bit because he had that whole medical thing, right when I lost my medical.
Oh, you have
Just
medical
talk-
too?
He had but he had like a stroke or something. Like it wasn't
Oh.
really the same. You couldn't compare.
Yeah, no.
You couldn't compare
You didn't.
being in an accident, whacking your head, compared to actually just like
Stroking.
falling out and having a stroke when you're 70.
Yeah.
Not the same thing.
And he came back from a stroke. Wow.
But it wasn't a major. It wasn't like a major
Small
stroke. It was a small.
But those are usually precursor
To a big one.
To a big one. Sometimes in your life.
Yeah.
You can pretty much say there's a good chance I'm gonna pop my collars on this one.
Yeah. I guess his thing was is he wanted to still be able to fly the jet with Mother
Right.
because they own their own.
They used to have a little citation. Now they have a Falcon, so things must be going well. Well, I don't know. So there's some cheap Falcons out there. Too.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's not a Falcon 2000.
It's not a trijet.
no,
900EX or whatever.
it's a Falcon 10, but
Oh, okay. Well, it's still a nice little jet.
yeah, it's still a nice little jet. It's not a it's not a CJ1.
No, okay,
yeah,
Okay.
it's still a nice little jet.
So they fly out of Memphis. Okay. What was flies jets out of there? There's always so few people that flew jets out of the runway line.
There's still, I mean, There's a couple people, I used to fly for command management when I used to do contract work. And they have a Bravo and a CJ3 out of there.
Oh, really?
Look it over by Crown Air,
Okay.
right near 24.
Alright.
There's a couple people that, there's some
Straight
citations.
wing jets?
Yeah, there's a few citations out on the line, you don't see them move much.
No.
I mean, it's all Part 91, you can't really do 135, you can't do 135, they have to be Part 91, the runway's not long enough to be 135 certified.
Exactly.
I mean, and you can even bring the Sovereign in there, but only Part 91.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know why they're trying to make an executive airport when you're gonna
That's
magically
right.
there's a fucking canyon there and a highway. You're not
Yes.
gonna magically make the runway longer.
No, it's it.
You can't. I don't understand. Like executive airport, right? So you're gonna encourage people to come here. They have to be straight. Yeah,
It's gonna
they have to
be
be, they have to be straight Part 91 owners. But there's no
What-
pilots lounge. There's no
Where
like
were you talking?
Montgomery. If I
There's no facilities.
If I was,
Montgomery.
you know, if I had to go, if I was based there when I was flying corporate and I ended up there in the pilot's lounge, I'd be straight pissed.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I'd be like, where's my coffee machine? Like you go to Gibbs and you're like, this is a coffee pot. Where's my Gucci coffee machine with my like 8 different selections of coffee that they have in flight safety and
Yeah.
most other FBOs? Like,
Where's my Nespresso machine?
you know, you go to Atlantic FBO in San Jose and there's a gym and quiet rooms.
Right.
You know, like you go to Millionaire and you have couches and
Yeah.
some of them you have individual flat screen TVs in your quiet rooms.
That's nice.
Yeah, and then
But you know, Gibbs doesn't ever seem to. They never seem to want to embrace it. How about Crown? Crown there's Crown.
Crown Air.
They have a nice place. Crown.
I mean,
So it's not set up.
it's just not set up for it. It's set up for.
Well, you know, Brown is trying to go corporate. Brown's pushing.
Brown's got the big long runway.
He does.
They do. It's just they're in the middle of nowhere. Well, I mean now that
Less so
that South
today.
Bay area.
Right. Less so today than they used to.
Yeah, less so today. I mean, people who live in South Bay, it's nice there if,
Mhm.
if that's where you're going.
But you're right. But if you land there, now you got to get to the center of San Diego north. Totally screwed.
Yeah.
There's an hour and a half of traffic.
I mean, if you're trying
So
to get to.
it's- But that's what Brown, I mean, down there, they're really pushing that. They're like not into GA and little flight school stuff. They're trying to push that into one section and then have the rest. Because, you know, the Hornet's going there from Yuma. That guy's making a killing off pumping it with gas.
Oh,
That wasn't big. Can't remember the name of it. But anyways, that's what they want.
Well, and they redid the ramp there.
Yes.
They
And
repainted
they're
the
doing
ramp.
redoing the runways.
They're redoing the runways, and the runways are long. They have supported entry,
Yeah,
which is
it
great if you're flying come back from Mexico. You're flying your jets down to Mexico. It's great, or anywhere in
Mhm.
Central America for that matter. You
Right.
can go to Belize or whatever.
Yeah. You can make it in there better than Lindbergh. and
Way better
cheaper.
than Lindbergh, way cheaper. I mean,
Yeah.
think of the price.
So I think that's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Because you got county versus city, right? That's a city airport.
Yeah.
So,
So it's,
yeah.
I mean, and then
So they might siphon something off it. Because Gillespie, how do you get corporate traffic in there? The can, you're in a box cans or out home meetings, right? The box.
yeah, the box, yeah,
So you have to get straight wing to get in there too, I think, for the most part.
for the most part, and it's
Part of the
It's-
short run.
there's so much risk with, you know, even like when we were flying to Palomar, you know, TCAS going on constantly all the time. You're, oh, here's a fucking Cessna trying to turn in, you know, fun, that's what I, you know, all the
We
time.
lost a flight, and she was flight trained and died there, collided with another guy. You remember that, several years back now, we're going 6, 7, 8 years back now.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, she was in flight training, she was in a twin, I think, was it a twin, she was in a hood or something.
Was that from Pinnacle?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And one guy was coming in, and she was leaving,
Mm.
and they connected
Yeah.
on the west side.
Well, that happens a lot in Palomar, but it happened to me a few times coming in when I was flying the Sovereigns, is we get TCAS alert because some dipshit would come in right under the glide slope, you know, they're out doing maneuvers,
Right.
but they duck in right under the glide slope, not realizing that they're in our
Yeah.
flight path.
Yeah.
Or you even hear it sometimes at Palomar, you just don't know. Number 3, and the next thing you know, you see the Cessna turn in front of you. You're like,
Yeah.
just said you were number 3.
Yeah, you didn't count real well. It's not your strong point. So Chicago, San Diego, nonstop, or
Chicago, LA.
LA and down? So you're retired. Yeah, you made it though.
Made it.
Well, you know, not
Made it.
sort of.
Now I gotta go to the doctor. I have a sinus infection.
Okay.
I felt it. I started feeling it yesterday, but coming back today, I was like, "Ooh, I better just don't let this go anymore."
Yeah,
Coming in on the arrival,
because that can be like needles in your face.
it felt like it
Yeah.
coming in, and then after the whole when I was even when I got to class, I could just feel like the pain for like an hour. It's probably like 2.5 hours after I landed. I just feel that.
Yeah, that sucks. I hate that.
Yeah, I need to go get a Z-Pack. So thankfully I was able to get an appointment at 1600. They were able to get me in.
You get that cleared out, yeah.
Yeah.
You just keep taking you know, like taking allergy pills all the time. I think that's like a Allegra. You know what I mean? It's non-drowsy.
Yeah.
Did that help or not?
No, it didn't. Because I thought it might have been, maybe it's just allergies going back and forth.
Yeah.
But, you know, when we had that full moon, that blue blood moon full moon
Yeah,
day,
the orange.
I went surfing at like early to watch the eclipse. So it was
Oh,
like
yeah,
that
it starts
surf.
still, yeah.
Yeah, so I was out surfing at like 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And then it was, we had the surf clinic. So I was in the water for like 8 hours that day. And it started early, so it was cold and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff. And so that's like that. That's probably what they had.
Yeah.
So I feel it in my sinuses. And I'm like, yeah, I was in the water on and off, getting my head wet. And, yeah, probably getting a sinus infection. This is Dr.
Zapped.
He's like, yeah, you got a sinus infection.
You got the bug?
Yeah, being on the water.
Yeah, well, I went surfing for that eclipse,
Uh-huh.
and I was in the
Was
water
out
for
there
like,
at PD like at 3:30, 4:30.
yeah, I was out
Oh,
out
jeez.
there for like, cause I did the eclipse surf, and then we had that, we had a surf clinic through Naval Medical Center that I volunteered out later that day, so I was in
Oh,
the water
okay.
for like 8 hours that day.
Oh, jeez.
That's a lot of water time.
It's a lot of water time, it was just a lot of time to be in a wetsuit, a lot of time to be wet, and you know, I figured and come in, you know, like I was telling him, I felt it for like 2.5 hours after that descent. I
Oh.
was like,
Get some needles and knives in the face.
Ouch.
yeah, I was like, I better nip this in the bud
You
before
won't have it.
before I let it go. You know,
Yeah, it's no fun.
it's no
No
fun.
fun, no, it
It's no
hurts.
fun.
I need to get to release now.
83.
Leave me.
Waiting for my next trip. So I'm so thankful we have freaking
So they flew on over the weekend, but this is Monday, so just flew today.
and then I picked up another day for next week because I didn't realize it was a 4-day weekend.
You know, I didn't realize it either. I didn't look at the calendar, but we don't have to come here next Monday.
So we have a 4-day weekend. I technically have 5 days off now because I'm off on Thursday, so I have 5 days off. So I was able to pick up another day out of it.
Did you just?
Yeah, well, somebody had put a day up. They offered $100 for the trip,
Oh.
and they put it in a trip. So I was like, "Woo, okay,
Hello,
I'll
I
pick it
get
up."
that $100.
Yeah, it was a Friday trip. I was
That's
like, okay,
cash money. Is that
that's cash. Yeah, I was like, I will take it.
Yep.
Because I'm off, you know, Thursday. So I'm off Thursday, and then I'm still picking up Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then I'll be off Monday too. So
Yeah.
gives me time to do it. And then I'll be off the weekend after that. So
Heck, and then this is February. Here, February, March, so that's spring break. That's not bad to break up February and then break that up.
yeah,
Knock
no,
a day out.
yeah, knock it out, and then
Yeah. Like that. Didn't think about that.
I didn't think about it either.
I mean, I do.
Yeah.
I did vacation up there, got it. It's nice.
That's good.
Yeah, it is. It's nice to have good use of your hands and stuff like that. You got this, you got work. But you're free from that.
I've been vacation over so
Give you a recommend that.
so I don't have to.
Oh, I can't, we can't, I'm so, I can't really.
I don't know. I don't know. I'll find out. It hasn't been approved yet. So
Yeah.
coming back from leave, I don't know if it's gonna get approved. But I don't know if that can even tie in as a factor because it's gotta be based on my seniority. And I'm the higher end of the middle of the pack when it comes to FLSS.
Yeah.
So, I never know, yeah, I just don't know. They're probably not gonna approve it. Should approve it next couple weeks.
Well, you probably taken enough classes, there's nothing you can take this summer. anyways.
Unless they offer airfare and electrical, no.
Which, I mean, have you ever seen that yet? I mean, I'm been here a year now. Have you seen that?
Well, I
Something like
think
that, it's kind of nebulous.
Pink was saying that they're gonna try to offer it.
Who teaches that?
Well, that was the thing. He had asked, I think he didn't teach it, but John didn't wanna teach it,
Who wants to summer off? Why is a teacher? I know.
but then, I don't know, I don't know. I haven't seen Pink to ask him. But, the summer catalog's gotta come out soon. It has to come out in the next couple of months. I mean, it has to.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it has to come out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, about the nature.
By March, it has to come out.
Right.
So,
So you gonna take anything this summer, Fritz?
What's that?
You gonna take anything this summer?
I don't think there's gonna be anything available to, except advanced,
I thought composites might be interesting.
advanced composites.
If I could get convinced my VA counselor to let me take advanced
Get
composites.
paid for it.
Because here's the thing, I don't wanna go back to full-time and not be able to switch back. You know what I mean? And if I could just get that and get her to prove it so I get paid for part-time at least.
Yeah,
And maybe fly a little bit more, but not cross that line with work, so that I don't lose my deal till I finish this program.
Right.
I wanna,
Unless if you were concerned about it not being able to finish.
I wanna walk that line as much as I can. And as long as they don't notice and I don't say anything, as long as I don't pick up too many hours, like if I start picking up too many trips and going what close looks like, if I think I pick up like 30 hours or 40 hours a month, I don't think anybody can say anything. But if I all of a sudden pick up like full 75-hour month, something like that, they're gonna probably just start filling my schedule. I think that'll just click something in the system automatically.
Yeah, don't want that to
I don't
happen,
want
'cause they're
that.
fighting back from that.
That
Because
will
they're short.
happen. Right, yeah. I'm gonna have to be like,
Yeah,
doctor, I need to know.
You have to figure something else out.
Then I'm gonna have to go talk to chief pilot and then that's just gonna be all
now you're
bad.
now you're on the other side of things, so.
And now it's gonna be like, really?
Well,
You don't look like you just broke yourself again, what's this note about?
I did break myself.
Yeah, I'd be like, well, I swear this is a lip,
Yeah, we've seen this before.
yeah.
You gotta do something new, that's what you used last time.
Yeah, exactly. Walk into the scene, I don't know, I'm blind, blind.
We've had people go, dizzy. They go, I've got vertigo. I guess, the tests for vertigo are not super conclusive.
Mhm.
So you really have to go, how are you?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you go, it's a miracle. The vertigo. We didn't do that. They just go, you know what, I wanna take a super long vacation. I mean, there's no way you can.
Right.
They wanna do like a, 3-month safari in town. But I've heard of
Well, then they do the stupid shit like, well, you can't use your flight benefits, and you're like, I don't need enough anyway. I could buy my own tickets.
Yeah,
Well,
they're
if
not
you
very-
were for American, you could be like, okay, fine, I'll buy my own plane ticket. Big punishment.
Exactly. It's
Big punishment. I can get there. Confirmed positive space. Punishment. Thank you.
well, they keep thinking they're hooked on the fact that space A is is it's like it's not.
It's not.
We've been stuck so many times.
Oh, you can't. I've actually bought my own ticket a few times just to get there.
Yeah.
Alright, and I still have a miles card, so I have miles to use if I need them. Because I've had to use them before actually. Back and forth. Sadly, I've been stuck
I
and
know it's ridiculous.
yeah, and I've used my like S2 privileges because we get Delta, so and so I've used my like
Delta ones are better.
the Delta ones are better. And I've
Yeah.
used my like you get 3 S2 privileges like
Right.
for VA, and I've had to use them.
I like the S2 because then it's got S2 with Delta and the S2 is good.
Yeah.
It's better.
I've had to use it like when I was on CRJ, commute from training from Salt Lake, like when I had to go do recurrent and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I used it a lot.
Right.
Well, not a lot, obviously. That, because it's really hard to get out of Salt Lake sometimes.
Yes, it
The
is.
wrong,
It can be totally swamped.
Yeah.
And then S2 is a nice little deal.
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and now when they cut flights, because they're short, and, especially in the parking plan. It's hard. I mean, there's some flights I got on, we'll listen to lines sometimes when they say they tell us that, oh, you get free flights and this and that. I'm like, pilots barely fucking get on, so you can sit in the jump seat. Good luck. Good luck, Max. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. See how that works for you.
Yeah, see how that works.
I know people talk about that and say, yeah, not having it would be worse, but having it is almost impossible. It's like, if you leave on a Tuesday at 6 a.m. and back on a Tuesday, then it may work for you. But
And if you can figure out, like, if you can reroute yourself and you're willing to go to like Anchorage back,
Yeah.
depending where you're going, work, and if you have the time. But the problem is too, is it's the flights, then it's getting, when you're here, first 5 years.
You're gonna get
You need the time off that you get, you can have to deposit. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever possibly seen. Like, oh, and then you can buy your island fares. Yeah. That's cute.
Yeah.
You go to my ID travel and they're all friendly.
That's exactly right. It's just great. They're like this.
Everybody's like,
Yeah. What are you doing? No, 83, you sure that's not, wait, this is the alpha. Did you look it up? Did you Google it up? Here, let's Google it. See what we get. Because it's bad, no one brains, I just outsourced it to Google.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier.
You have most of the books?
yeah.
Is this
Yeah,
you
when
working
you
on,
want
you
it.
working on this? Okay, so it's, what is it, C folder?
I haven't got any of those.
Oh.
It sounds like see, you guys, it sounds.
Sometimes, you know what, when I was in this class where you used some superseded books that had just older information, it was better, because they took out a new one. I can- I've seen that book, but I
I've
don't
seen
have
that
it.
book,
because
I don't have
I
it
don't
either.
have it, because I don't have good stuff in it. Yes, we have. Here, Brent.
No, that's my girlfriend. That's her mom is
They don't have it.
Sorry.
Yeah, they have them over on AD.
Hey, what time is?
No, yeah. It's 7, yeah, it's close. You're done.
Done.
Are you gonna be back tomorrow? Yeah.
Yeah. That's the book I need. Can you take a?
I'll just send it to you. Yeah, I'll just send it to you. They have it at
They have it?
the bookstore, I think I've seen it.
Yeah.
It looks familiar. It's got an airplane up front.
Looks like all the other
It
ones.
looks like all the other ones, yeah.
No, Max is pretty cool, but he's the.
Yeah, he's got the aviation side, right?
I got like 10 books in my locker, and of course.
I just sent it to you, it's in your coming reading.
It's coming?
Yeah.
It's inbound?
So what about, I'm gonna take it.
He's cool. Yeah, he's cool, dude. He's a very cool guy.
And he's,
Oh, yeah. Let's go. I'm not. Well, you need the battery for it. Should be good, right?
where are you down?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called like
food outside and feed them from outside. Because like, you know, I mean, they're not worried about it. They're worried they might not want to go outside and go to the bathroom. And then, yeah, of course, you go to the bathroom in the house, so I don't want to go there.
Test the electrolyte, test the
And then
voltage,
if
you guys get them all
gone a
tested?
week, that's
We're gonna go back and test them?
Yeah, we gotta keep doing it.
Let's
only-
go!
only when I-
We're gonna try and test them about every